There are only 8 days until Election Day, and millions of Americans are turning out early to vote. Over the weekend, the president and his chief of staff are offering diverging views on the nation's battle against the coronavirus pandemic. Yesterday, the United States saw its highest 7-day average of new daily cases since the pandemic began, and so far, 225,000 Americans have died. Yet despite the surge, President Trump insists the country is, quote, rounding the turn. While his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, says, quote, we are not going to control this pandemic. Mr. Meadows had been expected to make a number of television appearances, but this morning, those were abruptly canceled. He says the White House says that there was a security incident near his home. Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff and at least 4 other aides tested positive for COVID-19 over the weekend, raising concern about another possible outbreak at the White House. And despite potential exposure, Vice President Pence is refusing the quarantine in direct defiance of CDC guidelines. Rather, he is sticking to his scheduled visit to the nation's capital tonight, where he could preside over the Senate vote to confirm Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. Let us bring in Weijia Jiang, who is at the White House for us this morning. So, Weijia, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows spoke with reporters this morning, and he addressed that controversial comment over the weekend about the United States not being able to control the pandemic. This after the president repeatedly told us that this was a virus, this was a pandemic that we were going to defeat, and we were going to do that because he's a wartime leader, he's a wartime general. Here's what Mr. Meadows had to say.
We're going to defeat the virus. We're not going to control it. We will try to contain it as best we can. And if you look at full context of what I was talking about is we need to make sure that we have therapeutics and vaccines. We need to make sure that when people get sick, that they have the kind of therapies that the President of the United States has, that we can provide. Those emergency use authorizations hopefully will be coming in very short order. We're hopeful, very hopeful, based on a number of conversations that vaccines are just a few weeks away.
How does what we're hearing from Mr. Meadows match with what the president is saying, which is that we're rounding the turn? And what impact does this message have for those Americans who are living in the pandemic and for those 225,000 families, loved ones who have lost folks near and dear to them because of this virus?
So, Vlad, there are really 2 pieces of this conversation happening, which is one, what is the administration doing to try to stop the spread of the virus as it's happening right now? And secondly, what is the administration doing to help those who contract the virus? And I think on that piece, they are saying the same thing. The president, all the officials here at the White House, including Mr. Meadows, want to stress that they have done a lot for therapeutics, that the vaccine is on the way, and Americans will soon have access to it. I think what's different is where they believe we are in terms of the virus. As you mentioned, the president keeps saying we're about to turn a corner, suggesting, contrary to evidence, that the end of the pandemic is near. Whereas you have Meadows saying, actually, it is going to continue to spread, and it almost seems inevitable that it will spread because he says you cannot control the virus because it is so contagious. What he didn't say is why not put more focus and do even more to try to contain it, to try to stop the spread. So it seems like Meadows is saying, well, since it's going to happen anyway and the virus is uncontrollable because the way it moves, let's focus on that second part. But that's really not what people at home want to hear. They want to hear how we're going to flatten the curve, how we're going to stop the cases, and what we can do as a country to do that better, since it's a question we've been asking now for so many months. So to answer your other question, Vlad, I think it is still confusing for people when they're getting these mixed messages, especially when one of them is coming from the president using the phrase turning a corner as often as he can, because that's just not the case. There are no roadmaps that show that that corner is anywhere nearby, since the number of cases continues to rise every day.
And
in fact, increasingly, Weijia, what we've I was going to say, what we've heard from the president and others is, sort of actively seeking out instances where they can say, well, that people were wearing masks under these circumstances, but somehow they still got the virus, misrepresenting studies about people eating in restaurants. And we saw he did that in, I believe it was one of the town hall meetings. So it's not just like, why aren't you more actively encouraging people to wear masks? It's also sort of actively diminishing the effectiveness of masks that we know have been scientifically proven to be one of the best things you can do to protect yourself from this virus.
Yeah, it is remarkable that there still seems to be a disconnect with what the advice is from the White House and what medical experts are saying. One thing, as you point out, we often hear is that, some of you guys, meaning reporters, religiously wear masks and you catch COVID-19 anyway. But the mask largely is not to protect me. It's to protect other people. It's to protect my colleagues, my friends, my family members, in case I have the virus and I may be asymptomatic and I don't know that I have it. It's to protect you. So even if I did wear a mask all the time, if not everyone else around me is doing the same thing, I could catch it. Because remember, according to doctors, when you put it on your face, that's not really meant to keep it from entering your body. And so I think it is also telling that even at this point, even as we are dealing with the second White House outbreak, there really hasn't been a change in behavior or guidance. I asked Meadows just this morning, whether they were going to do anything differently tonight when the president plans to hold another event for Judge Amy Coney Barrett after her confirmation vote. And he just talked about social distancing. He did not mention masks. He did not mention the fact that 1 month ago today, that super spreader event, which was also for Judge Barrett, led to, more than a dozen cases, which I asked about. And he said, look, it wasn't just that event. We are tracking 3 different places where people who tested positive from that event may have caught it. So there still seems to be a lot of explaining away and a lot of resistance to following very basic science.
It's such an interesting point, Weijia, that you make about the wearing of the masks. And one of the things that we're seeing now is we're seeing governors. Let me just read a tweet from Governor Gary Herbert, who's the governor of Utah. He's a Republican. He says this, quote, "Our hospitals are being overwhelmed and the stress they are experiencing is unsustainable. This is why we required masks in high and moderate transmission areas and also asked residents in these areas to limit gatherings to 10 or fewer. I ask Utahns to not just lean on your own experience during this pandemic, learn from the science." So that is a Republican governor of a state that is now suggesting that what is happening in his state with regards to the transmissions and the overwhelming stress that is being placed on the hospitals is unsustainable. And yet the president of the United States continues to tell the American people that we're rounding the turn. They continue to hold these rallies where, yes, I know that they pass out masks, but we don't see a lot of folks wearing them. We see folks packed tightly together. I get that it's outdoors, but so was that super spreader event where they nominated Judge Amy Coney Barrett. And so now we're hearing that there may be another event. Weijia, so is that confirmed for this evening?
That is the plan, as long as everything goes accordingly with her vote on Capitol Hill, which we expect. And so, again, the question is what it's going to look like. Obviously, we saw the first event. People were sitting shoulder to shoulder. There were so many people packed on the South Lawn. And Judge Barrett's family was there, obviously, too, because, the event was for her. And so we don't know if that's going to be the case tonight. We don't know how many people there will be. We don't know where she physically will be alongside the president, whether any of her family members will be here, et cetera. But again, Meadows defended having another one, saying that, even though so many people who attended the last one ended up testing positive, we don't know that that event was the source. And so, again, there is, just a refusal to take some responsibility for what that event may have had in, so many cases afterward.
You know, with sort of all the conversation about COVID, people are still sort of waiting on they're sitting on pins and needles, waiting to find out whether or not they're going to get any sort of supplemental check or anything to help them through what has become a very dire time financially for many, many people. But it looks like Republican lawmakers have prioritized Barrett's nomination over anything else. Why is this so important for them to get done when clearly the country has been demanding some sort of relief, economic relief, that they've been without now for months?
Well, this is one of the president's main campaign promises that he was able to keep, and it is important to the party to be able to say that we put 3 Supreme Court judges on the bench. I mean, that is a big deal because, presumably we will be out of this pandemic. Hopefully soon, sooner than later. And hopefully the economy as a result will come bouncing back. Those are things that we can see in the near-ish future. When you're talking about a Supreme Court judge, you're talking about an entire generation. And so this is a massive victory for them to be able to say we're having a lasting impact not only on the immediate future of the country, but really on the fabric of the country, on what it's going to look like moving forward, on the monumental cases that really define what makes America America. And so it's a win for them because they were able to deliver. And this is something that the president will continue to talk about. And it is really important to Republican voters and his supporters because it's not just a single victory. It encompasses many of the core values that the president used to get here to the White House.
Weijia, before we let you go, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and advisor to the president of the United States, was on Fox News this morning. And the president has said that he is the least racist person that you or I might know, that he has done more for black people in this country than any other president, except for perhaps Abraham Lincoln. And we know that the Trump campaign is trying to galvanize African-American support for his campaign. Here's what Jared Kushner said on Fox News this morning about the black community. Quote, President Trump's policies are the policies that can help people break out of the problems that they're complaining about. But he can't want them to be successful more than they want to be successful. I don't understand that comment. Essentially, it sounds to me as if Mr. Kushner is suggesting that the reason that some people are in the straits that they find themselves in has nothing to do with systemic racism, has to do with the fact that they just don't want to be successful. So what is the message to African-American voters other than the economy and criminal justice reform, which I know the president has talked about, but what is the impetus for suggesting that African-Americans vote for another 4 more years of Trump?
Well, I think you really nailed it, Vlad. Those are the 2 things that they continue to hit. And the problem with this argument, the problem with what Kushner said this morning, is that it's based on the false premise that there are equal opportunities for every American. That is just not true. And so they're not doing themselves any favor when they're saying that, the president and the administration can only do so much and, Americans have to do their part as well. Again, that's based on the assumption that even if Americans have that desire and that will, that they have the chance. And what we're talking about is chance. And I think so many communities of color feel that they do not have the same chances. And historically, the numbers show that they do not. And we're still in that position right now. And so I think what voters want to hear is how you're going to create those new opportunities. And the president will argue that he has created opportunity zones, that he has given more money than any other president to historically black colleges and universities. And so he does have an argument and says, I am putting my money where my mouth is and I'm trying to level the playing field. But whenever you have his top advisor coming out to say something like that, it almost puts everything backwards, right? Because it's refusing to acknowledge the systemic racism that the country continues to grapple with. And I've asked this before, how can you fix a problem that you won't even acknowledge?
All right, Weijia Jiang for us at the White House. Weijia, as always, we thank you very much.